Thank you, Brittany. Good morning. My name is Ann Storey, and I'm the Associate Director for Career and Technical Education at the Illinois Community College Board. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit this morning about competency-based education and a project that ICCB embarked on this past year with several of our community colleges. Well, first, before we kind of dive into a brief overview of CBE and what it is, I wanted to talk about how we got to this point. So there's a growing interest among community colleges to develop and implement CTE programming. Higher education in Illinois is prioritizing equity. And because COVID-19 has disrupted our systems, expectations of education, of training, and employment have changed. However, interest remains high for non-degree programs and flexible options. So while it's true enrollment has declined, a Strata survey from 2020 kind of showed that adults who want career changes or are going to preparing to upskill are going to return to higher education in an increase of 25% over the next 5 years. And with that return to higher education comes some student concerns. A lot of times those students wonder if the cost of higher education is worth it. They kind of lack the confidence in their ability to persist and complete, and they lack a certain connection to the workforce. So that is where CBE can come in. So to start, I thought I would give you kind of a definition of CBE. So CBE stands for Competency-based Education, and what it does is it focuses on actual student learning and the application of that learning rather than the amount of time spent in a classroom or on certain class material. Learners' progress is measured when they demonstrate their competence through a series of rigorous assessments. So that means that they have to go in and they have to kind of prove or show that they've mastered certain knowledge and certain skills that are required for that area of study. So for competency, we kind of look at it with this graphic. We start with knowledge and we want to know, what do students need to know? What theories or ideas? And then we move on to skills and abilities. What do these students need to be able to do in their career, in their job to be successful? And then we progress onto intellectual behaviors. What dispositions must I display? And then we look at the application and transfer of all of that. So where must I be able to apply the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, and at what level? So basically what we're saying is that we understand a certain theory and we have the skills and the dispositions to successfully apply all of these at the beginning of the situation. So what we're thinking about here is we're going to focus on what students need to be successful, and we're going to focus on the outcomes that will result in that success. So when we look at, commonalities across CBE or what, certain institutions might look for, we want to know what a student can already do when they're coming into the program. Then we're going to look at, how can they master those skills? How can they become proficient in those skills? And those are going to be demonstrated through a series of rigorous assessments. We're going to focus more on the student journey, and we're going to realize that time is variable and learning is fixed. And through CBE, we can offer a more flexible or personalized approach to a student's education so that they feel that they are getting more out of it. They are getting out of it what they need, and therefore that cost or that question of whether or not higher education is worth it becomes more of a yes for these students. So another graphic for you to kind of wrap your mind around CBE or competency-based education. So when we embarked on a project, which I'll talk about next, we focused on equity. So we are taking competency-based education and looking at it through an equity lens and we're going to equip and empower thousands upon thousands of students of color to earn needed credentials. We're going to focus on competence as a necessary component of completion. So therefore, they're more engaged in their learning, they're more engaged in the process, and they're getting more out of it. And by doing this, we hope to close certain equity gaps. So what we did is ICCB, along with several community colleges from Illinois, participated in what was known as the Equity Collaboratory that was hosted by JFF and the Competency-based Education Network, or CBEN. So these two groups came together to kind of mutually support colleges, universities, systems, and they demonstrated that quality and equitable CBE programs that you're grounding in labor market value, labor market information, can eliminate certain disparities in educational outcomes of learners from historically underserved and underrepresented populations. So JFF, what their main mission is they're looking to kind of drive change in the American workforce and also in education systems so that everybody can achieve some type of economic advancement. So their overall goal is they want to build a society or workforce in which everyone has the credentials and the skills that they need to achieve economic advancement. CBEN is a network of institutions and employers and experts, and they all have committed to kind of unlocking the potential of competency-based education, the kind of mystery that surrounds competency-based education, to ensure that education and training become more flexible, it becomes more responsive, and therefore it's more valuable to students. So at the beginning of 2021, we embarked on this project called the Illinois Equity Collaboratory. And what we did was we participated as part of a team led by CBEN and JFF. And it included multiple institutions across the nation. And we obviously represented Illinois. So you can see the colleges from Illinois who participated in the consortium are listed here. We had Blackhawk, City Colleges of Chicago, Elgin, Parkland, Rend Lake, and Triton. And they completed a lot of work. They attended a lot of meetings based on CBE. And the overall goal was to help institutions and systems action plan or come up with a way that their schools could use CBE to achieve more equitable outcomes. And what these meetings did was they kind of primed us as a group, but these schools individually, to complete an action plan created by CBEN to use to kind of begin to think about implementing CBE at their institutions. So we started by thinking about, why is this important? Why now? And basically, we came up with these, or CBEN came up with these three reasons. Higher education is meant to be an engine of economic opportunity and mobility, yet for too long, it's been a struggle to provide access that is equitable. Black and Latino populations experience significant achievement gaps, and high quality CBE programs that meet the needs of local employers, they're kind of essential when we think about revamping higher education to make it more equitable and to expand kind of economic advancement for everyone involved. So what CBEN introduced to our Equity Collaboratory was something called the theory of change. So the theory, I've listed it here, and basically what the theory of change is, despite we've had decades and decades of research, of investment, we've looked at different ways to redesign post-secondary education, and it still remains really, really inequitable. Students are often leave their programs, ill-prepared for the jobs that they've been promised, or they're unable to advance when they get to those jobs. We've had, lots of transformations in the economy. We've got a COVID recession, and all of this stuff is just making it harder for colleges to keep up. So what CBEN is saying with their theory of change is that if we focus on teaching and learning, we can drive strong job and career outcomes for students. And then as a result, we can increase equity for all students. So in order to achieve, the desirable outcomes, we have to look at mindset, we have to look at learning, scale, and also equity. So for our collaboratory that we participated in with CBEN, we are done with what is called phase one. So what we focused on here was we began to be equipped for designing CBE programs that are equity-based and that are rooted really solidly in labor market outcomes. And what we were able to do is each college that actively participated, by the time the phase one was over, they had created or drafted a rough draft for some of them, individualized CBE action plans for their own institutions. And also that can serve as a resource for other educational systems, institutions, state systems to do the same. So for the Equity Collaboratory, there were a few requirements. So we met monthly and we learned about the 9 tenets of a quality equity-based CBE design. We completed guided activities, and through these activities, each college kind of looked at their own institution and explored, areas that they could improve upon. They kind of stopped to think about, like, what would CBE mean for their particular institution? What program or area would they want to begin focusing on? And then each month, we had to be open to sharing those findings and kind of discussing the ways that we were going to enhance, or the institutions were going to enhance their own performance. So all of the meetings and the homework assignments revolved around the 9 tenets of an equitable CBE program. And I've got those listed here. So in order, for a CBE program to be equitable, it has to be culturally responsive. It has to be learner-centered. It has to be high quality. It has to be driven by competencies. You have to really utilize and ground your program in labor market demand and data. And possibly most importantly, these CBE programs have to lead to credentials of some type of value for students. Institutions have to offer pre-program socialization, some type of career planning and readiness supports, because we want students to leave these programs prepared for their jobs and also with the ability to advance. The institutions have to offer program achievement and persistence supports, and they have to offer some type of post-graduation transition and placement support. So basically what we learned, or what CBEN kind of preached during these workshops, is that CBE, when done correctly, is a significantly better approach to teaching and learning. And that we, in order to have higher education be more equitable, we have to expand the number of quality CBE programs and also the number of students that we're serving. So our results from our own Equity Collaboratory is that we did attend the monthly workshops through CBEN, and then our group of Illinois colleges, we also met monthly to kind of work through the assignments together and to brainstorm. Now, the overall end goal was not to have one action plan for Illinois, but it was for each institution that was actively participating and interested. They had started a draft or drafted action plans specific to their own colleges. So while we did a lot of the assignments as a team and brainstorming, they took that work and on their own, tailored it and made it more specific to their particular institution. A lot of times this meant that they had to go through and they had to define kind of CBE, what it means at their individual institutions. And the end result was to have the draft of an action plan. So they completed monthly homework assignments. For example, some of those consisted with basically starting to look at equity. How does the institution currently define equity? How are you defining equity as representative of your college? What type of equitable outcomes do you have in mind for your particular institution? We're looking at like what key data did the institution collect on learners that represent diversity? We looked at what were your individual institution or schools DEI goals. And that kind of set the tone for the first assignment. The second assignment that we worked on was looking at target populations. So each institution kind of had to define their target populations because, you know, these CBE programs need to be culturally relevant and learner-centered. So then they had to stop and ask themselves, what do students want out of a CBE program? What professional development will faculty need? How are we going to make this work for faculty? How are we going to kind of, you know, it's kind of shaking up the educational landscape because we're not looking at your traditional semester. We're not looking at your traditional 16 weeks in class. How are faculty going to make that adjustment? After, you know, we looked at equity, after they looked at their target populations and how, you know, beginning to just think how they could make this work for faculty, the next assignment focused on writing their own theory of change. Assignment 4 focused on labor market demand. So CBE programs have to lead to credentials of value. So the colleges had to look at how is their labor market information going to help them meet their intended outcome. Who are their key players? And we're talking about both internal key players or stakeholders and also external. What businesses are you going to work with? Who in your college is going to help you come up or write new curriculum? We also had to look at any potential barriers. I know a lot of colleges kind of struggled with how are we going to compensate faculty? That was one barrier that was brought up multiple times. We also had to consider how will labor market information help lead to credentials of value for students. And after we did those, you know, 4 kind of brainstorming assignments, colleges took that information and they began to draft their own action plan. So the end result was, I think out of 7 colleges participating, 3 or 4 had come up with a rough draft of an action plan. And are, you know, kind of looking at what the next maybe 3 to 5 years looks like as they begin to develop and possibly down the road implement a CBE program for one of their CTE programs down the road. Any questions?
So Anne, we did have one question come through.
Okay.
If you could expand on what you mean by learning is fixed.
Okay. I think what they're getting at is like students tend to engage more or maybe even learn more when they're actually doing something. So there's only so much that they can take in sitting in a classroom for 16 weeks or getting a lecture. Whereas if they can get to the part quicker where they actually apply what they're learning from a textbook or a lecture, they can progress through these, or they begin to master skills a little bit quicker. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
So Elizabeth, if you want to provide just some feedback, if that was able to answer your question or not, I can have Anne expand later on. But we did have a few more questions come in. So Anne, could you give more specific details on the proposed action plans?
It looks like most of them are focusing on a manufacturing element or welding. I came in on this kind of at the tail end. I know that they were focusing on CTE, and most of them, it was some type of manufacturing. I can probably get you a few more detailed, and we are going to go into more detail at ICCCA next week as well. But the action plans were was provided by CBEN, and kind of, you know, had us brainstorm all through all of those 4 homework assignments, and just kind of make it into a, you know, kind of a laying the foundation. It's not really an implementation plan as much of it is, you know, developing a CBE program.
Great, thank you. And then you had mentioned rigorous assessments. Can you expand on that a little bit more and what that will look like?
I don't know if there's a one size fits all. I think that that was something that the institutions kind of had to come up with, what it would look like, you know, for their faculty, for their programs, what, you know, employers are looking for when they get students into their businesses. But that was something that I think the schools were going to have to kind of define on their own. How would they be assessed? How would they be graded? How often would they be assessed? But the whole purpose was, you know, you can take as little time as you need to master the skill, or you can take as long as you need.
Wonderful, thank you. So that is all the questions I see in the chat, but if anyone has additional questions, you can feel free to type those in there, or if you have a working microphone and would like to unmute yourself and ask that way, you are able to do that as well. And I know Ann and I both have children, so we have no problem sitting in silence for a little bit.
No, not at all. No. And if anything, we can give you part of your morning back as well.
Yes.
But I think the important thing though is, you know, it's kind of a learning process for everyone. And if it's something that you're interested in, or your institution is interested in, you kind of have to think about, like, what is it going to mean for your own institution? Like I said, I don't think there's a one size fits all approach. I did think our Illinois Collaboratory was very helpful in that. I think some of the most productive meetings was just the colleges getting together and just bouncing ideas off of each other. I know several colleges mentioned that this was going to have to be a team effort to get people on board, that even the action plan would have to be worked on as a team, because one person didn't feel comfortable speaking for all of the other pieces to the CBE puzzle. So I think that basically the best way to start is, you know, what would it mean for our particular institution, for our students, and where is labor market information indicating where this would be beneficial? You know, where can we get students into, you know, higher paying jobs quicker? Where is the demand in our area?
We did have a question come through regarding funding. So does this type of program satisfy or support specific funding sources, or is this more theoretical?
CBEN does offer funding. That's phase 2 of the collaboratory that we participated in. I don't know how many of our schools were actually ready to submit their action plans to see if funding through CBEN would be possible. We are hoping to have some type of funding available in the future, for not necessarily for implementation, but just so you could begin to develop a CBE program at your own institution. I don't have any more concrete information on that at the moment, but as soon as I do, it'll be posted to the appropriate places.
Okay, thank you so much, Anne. I think this was a great session and definitely sparked some interest for several of the attendees on the webinar.